Hello, everyone. I suppose I'm just an ordinary wife, like so many other women. I was a bride who walked down the aisle with a heart full of dreams and hope for the future. I used to believe that if you just lived your life with sincerity and worked hard, you would be rewarded with a warm home, a home filled with love. I truly thought my husband's family would become my second family, a peaceful haven where I could share all my joys and sorrows, all the little worries that come with building a life. But from the very first day I set foot in my husband Michael's family home, I knew that wasn't going to be my story. The moment that front door swung open, I felt a kind of cold I couldn't quite name. It wasn't the chill of a winter's day. It was the coldness of strangers' eyes, of stiff and awkward smiles. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was a woman with a stern look about her. She greeted me with a single, indifferent nod. I tried my best to offer a bright, warm smile, but that smile couldn't melt the iciest corner of that house. It couldn't even begin to. My life after getting married was nothing like I had imagined. Far from being a place of love and sharing, my new home felt more like a workplace, and I was the unpaid help. I'd wake up early every morning to cook and clean and do the laundry. Then I would rush off to my own job, working hard to earn money to help Michael with our expenses. When I came home at night, the housework would be waiting for me, and I'd keep at it until everyone else had gone to bed. My life became an endless cycle of chores, a loop with no way out. I tried so hard. I tried to be a good daughter-in-law, a gentle and supportive wife. I tried everything I could think of to please Margaret, to win her acceptance. But, as some of you might already know, my best was never good enough. If a single green bean fell from the serving dish onto the table, if there was a tiny scuff mark on the floor I'd just mopped, if a shirt I'd ironed had the slightest hint of a wrinkle, she would say it. What a clumsy wife. Can't even handle the simplest chores. Utterly useless. Those words felt like a knife twisting in my heart every single time. I couldn't argue. I couldn't talk back. All I could do was lower my head, quietly clean up the mess, and let the silent tears fall down my cheeks when no one was looking. I kept telling myself, you have to be patient. You have to endure it. I held on to the hope that one day, Margaret would understand. One day, she would come to love me, but I was wrong. I put too much faith in the kindness and decency of people. One afternoon, I was vacuuming the living room when I overheard Margaret talking to Michael in the kitchen. "Just look at her," she said, her voice sharp with disdain. "She can't do anything right. You're working yourself to the bone, and she's just puttering around at that little part-time job, wasting money. How are you two ever going to save for a house or a new car like this? And on top of it all, she can't even give me a grandchild. How is this family supposed to carry on?" Hearing those words was like a physical blow. I couldn't believe she would say something so cruel. I couldn't believe she would stand there and tear me down to my own husband. I just stood there, frozen, the vacuum cleaner still humming in my hand, as I listened to it all. My heart was pounding in my chest, my head was spinning, and I felt as if the whole world was crumbling around me. I kept waiting, hoping that Michael would stand up for me, that he would say something, anything. But he remained silent. She Purdue. He heard every word, and he said nothing. In that moment, I knew. I knew he didn't trust me, and he didn't love me. He was a cold husband, a man with whom I could share a house, but not a life. That night, I cried myself to sleep. I went back to our room, laid down, and let the hot tears stream down my face and soak into the pillow. I wasn't crying because of what Margaret had said. I was crying because of what Michael hadn't. I wasn't crying because of the injustice of it all, but because of the profound, rushing loneliness. I had no hope left, no dreams. There was just me, alone in that small room, with nothing but my sorrow and my pain for company. My married life was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a tragedy. It was a story of patience and endurance, and of quiet tears shed in the dead of night. I had believed I would be loved, only to find that love was a distant luxury I couldn't afford. I was just the wife, the worker, a person in the house with no voice and no real presence. The tears on my pillow have long since dried, but the ache in my heart has never gone away. Day after day, I continue to live in the quiet stillness of that house, caught between my mother-in-law's cold demeanor and my husband's indifference. I kept telling myself to accept it, to endure it, that things had to get better eventually. But I was wrong about that too. In this life, pain doesn't just stop at a certain limit. It keeps piling up, one layer on top of another, until you're so heavy with it you can't feel anything at all. Then came the evening at the dinner table. The whole family was gathered. After days of a tense, cloudy atmosphere hanging over the house, the mood suddenly turned bright. A glittering smile appeared on Margaret's face, and she made an announcement that I could never have imagined. "For my birthday this year, we're going to have a grand celebration," she declared, her voice filled with pride. "The entire family is going on a trip together, all 20 of us. The whole extended family." I stopped, my fork halfway to my mouth. 20 people? That was no small group, and it would be an incredibly expensive trip. I looked over at Michael. He was just staring down at his plate, saying nothing. I knew in an instant. He hadn't known about this either. This was as much of a surprise to him as it was to me. Margaret's eyes then landed on me. "Sarah," she said, and her tone was no longer celebratory but commanding. "You'll be the one to book the plane tickets for everyone." I looked at her, my face a mask of anxiety. "For all 20 of us, Margaret?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Where are we going?" Margaret answered with a cool, unbothered look on her face. "Oh, Hawaii. It's so warm and pleasant there, you know. As for the cost of the tickets, well, we haven't exactly sorted that out yet. You go ahead and book everything first. Your husband will pay for it." I looked over at Michael. He just stared down at his plate, his head lowered, and he didn't say a single word. His eyes, you see, they told the whole story. They were filled with a paralyzing mix of confusion and helplessness. He had no idea what to do either. He knew perfectly well that we didn't have that kind of money in the bank. Not enough to cover an extravagant trip for 20 people. He knew it was impossible. And in that same instant, he knew that in the end, I would be the one left to figure it out, that I would be the one to carry the burden. I understood. In that single, silent moment, I understood everything. He wasn't going to give me a single dime. He was going to stand back and let me handle all of it. This was his way of avoiding responsibility, his quiet method for escaping his mother's inevitable blame. That night, I couldn't sleep. The questions just spun around and around in my head, a relentless carousel of anxiety. A trip to Hawaii for 20 people. How much would a trip like that even cost? How was I, with my small paycheck from my part-time job, ever going to pay for something like that? Would I have to work countless hours of overtime, picking up every extra shift I could find? Would I have to start skipping meals, pinching every single penny, going without for days and weeks on end, just to scrape that kind of money together? I glanced over at my husband. He was fast asleep, breathing deeply and evenly. His face, can you imagine? It looked so peaceful, so innocent. He had no idea about the storm that was raging inside my mind. He had no idea how much I was suffering, right there beside him. I once believed that I would be loved. I truly believed I would find a place for myself in a warm, caring family home. But I finally realized that belief was nothing more than a fantasy, a story I had told myself. In my own home, I was just the help, a worker with no voice, no real presence at all. And now, I had become the one who had to shoulder every burden, the one who had to endure everything in silence. Margaret's words, "You go ahead and book it, your husband will pay," kept echoing in my mind. It wasn't a promise of support, it was a sentence. It was a guilty verdict that threw me into a deep, dark pit of anxiety and despair. 20 people. I had never even considered a number like that before. The list would include extended relatives I didn't even know. 20 people. The entire clan. If I made one single mistake, if one detail was out of place, I knew they wouldn't hesitate to criticize me for it. And Hawaii, That was an expensive, luxury destination. It was the kind of place I only ever saw in pictures on my phone screen. Lying there in the dark, I started doing the math in my head. The plane tickets, the hotels, the food, the transportation, for a wife like me, working a part-time job just to help my husband make ends meet, every single number was astronomical. It was an impossible figure. I knew then that no matter how many extra shifts I picked up, no matter how many lunches I skipped, no matter how much I suffered, I could never earn enough money in time. Sleep was a stranger to me that night. The questions just kept pounding in my head. Why would Margaret do this? Why make such an impossible, unreasonable demand? Was she doing it on purpose, just to make my life difficult? Or did she simply not care about my feelings at all? In her eyes, was I really nothing more than an errand girl, just someone to be used? And so, my husband said nothing. He just sat there in silence. And his silence, you see, that silence hurt me more than any words ever could. Do you know that feeling? He had heard everything, every single demand, every impossible expectation, and yet he didn't say a word. He didn't come to my defense. He didn't shield me from the storm. He just left me there, completely alone, to carry the entire weight of it all by myself. I once believed that he was my partner in life. I truly thought he was the person I would share every hardship with, every single worry and fear. I believed with all my heart that he was the only one who truly understood me, the only one who really loved me. But in that moment of crushing silence, I finally understood. That belief, that trust I had placed in him, it was all just a fantasy I had built in my own mind. He wasn't my partner. He was just a cold husband, a man who shared my house but could never share my life. The very next day, my mother-in-law, Margaret, started in on me. "Well, Sarah, have you booked the tickets yet? The birthday is just around the corner, you know," she said, her voice sharp and impatient, prodding me like I was a lazy servant. I looked up at her, trying to keep my face from showing the panic I felt inside. "I'm looking for the best prices, Margaret," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying to find a good deal. Just give me a little more time." I spent hours trying to find a way, any way, to make this trip happen without plunging us into financial ruin. I scoured every travel website I could think of. Expedia, Kayak, all of them. I looked for sales, for package deals, for last-minute miracles. But every time I clicked search, the numbers that appeared on the screen were staggering. They were impossibly high. Figures that were so far beyond our reach, they might as well have been from another planet. I finally went to Michael, my heart pounding with dread. "Michael," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "this trip, it's just too expensive. We don't have enough money to buy these tickets." I watched him, hoping for a flicker of understanding, of support. But he wouldn't even look at me. He just stared down at the floor, his shoulders slumped. "Just go ahead and book them," he mumbled. "We'll figure it out later. It's just Mom talking, you know how she is. I'll take care of it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'll take care of it." Those words, they weren't a promise. They were the deepest betrayal I had ever known. He knew perfectly well that his mother would never pay for a single penny of this trip. He knew she intended to leave the entire burden on me, on us. And he knew we didn't have the money. He was saying those words only to escape the conversation, to avoid having to face his mother, to shirk his responsibility completely. That betrayal, that calculated lie, it wounded me more deeply than any of Margaret's cruel words ever had. In that moment, I knew I could never trust him again. And if I couldn't trust him, how could I believe in our love? I went back to our small room and sat down in front of the computer. I typed in the search again. Round-trip flights for 20 adults from New York to Honolulu. The number that flashed on the screen was a monster. It was a figure so large, it seemed to mock me. It was truly, utterly terrifying. I pulled up our bank account online and stared at the balance. A wave of complete and utter powerlessness washed over me. There wasn't enough money. It was impossible. I simply could not do it. I started calling the airlines directly, asking about group rates, about promotions. about any possible package deals. But every conversation was a dead end, another wave of despair. You're looking for 20 tickets, ma'am? Round trip to Hawaii? And would you like to book hotel accommodations as well? The questions themselves felt like a form of humiliation. I had to force my voice to sound steady, to sound casual, as if this were a normal, everyday purchase for me. I couldn't let them hear the desperation, the suffering that was choking me. I had to pretend to be a woman of means, a wife who could afford to arrange a lavish family vacation without a second thought. I had to lie about my job, about our income, painting a picture of a life that wasn't mine. And with every lie I told, a sharp pain stabbed at my chest. I felt so small, so pathetic and helpless. I had believed I would be loved. I had believed I would live in a warm and caring home. But I finally saw the truth. That belief was just a childish dream. In my own home, I was nothing more than the help, a diligent worker, yes, but a servant with no voice and no real presence. And now, I had become the one who had to carry every single burden, the one who had to endure everything. Sitting there in that little room, staring at the bright computer screen, I felt a deep and profound emptiness settle over me. There was no hope left, no dreams to hold on to. All I had was my sadness and my pain, and I was completely, utterly alone. My life after marriage was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a tragedy. It was a long story of quiet endurance, of biting my tongue, and of tears shed silently into my pillow night after night. I had believed I would be loved, but I learned that love was a luxury I could not afford. I was just the wife, the worker, a ghost in my own house. And I was the one who had to bear the weight of it all. But I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say a single word of protest to Margaret. I just gave a single, slow nod. It was a nod that held all of my silent endurance, all of my pain. And then I turned and walked quietly back to my room. My mother-in-law, I'm sure, saw my nod and my quiet retreat as a sign of surrender. She probably had a smug, triumphant look on her face. She didn't realize what that nod truly meant. It wasn't my agreement. It was a beginning. It was the beginning of a plan that had been growing in my heart for a very, very long time. In her eyes, I was still the obedient, docile wife who would eventually give in to every demand. But inside my heart, the embers of resentment and pain had finally caught fire, and a flame of cold, calculated revenge was beginning to burn. I went back to my room and closed the door behind me. That small, cramped space was the only place in the entire house where I could be myself. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and clicked on the icon for a blank Excel spreadsheet. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long night. It was a night of preparation, a night of calculation, and a night of decision. I started to type, creating a list. I listed all the family members' names, their email addresses, their phone numbers, and where they lived. To anyone looking over my shoulder, I would have looked like the most devoted daughter-in-law, meticulously preparing for the big family trip. I worked carefully, paying attention to every detail, as if it were the most important project in the world. I worked on that list through the night and for several days that followed, until it was perfect. Every name I typed onto that spreadsheet brought back a fresh wave of pain and shame. These were the names of the people who had watched me being treated unfairly day after day. These were the people who had heard the whispers and the insults and had always chosen to stay silent. Their silence, to me, felt like complicity. Every email address, every phone number, was a link to a world where I had never truly belonged. A world of selfishness, of convenience, and of cold, hard indifference. I started making calls to some of the relatives, asking for their personal details and their preferences for the trip. They sounded surprised. "My goodness, Sarah," one of my aunts-in-law said. "Why do you need to know all of this?" I put a bright, cheerful smile into my voice before I answered. "Oh, I'm just getting everything organized for Margaret's big birthday trip," I chirped. "She wants the whole family to go on a vacation together. Isn't that wonderful? They all cheered for me. They told me what a kind and generous person my mother-in-law was, and they told me how lucky I was to have her. But they didn't know. They couldn't see that her generosity was a lie, that her kindness was a performance. They didn't know about the suffering I was enduring, and they certainly didn't know that I was quietly preparing my revenge. I spent my nights searching for airline tickets, comparing carriers, taking notes on flight times and layovers. I looked for budget flights, cheap hotels, and affordable restaurants, desperately trying to figure out how to piece together the money for this trip, while saving every last dollar. I worked more hours. I ate less food. I saved everything I could. I did it all for this trip. I contacted the airlines and travel agencies directly, asking about package tours. I had to lie about my job, about our income. I told them I was a wealthy woman who could easily afford a luxurious vacation. With every lie I told, a sharp pain stabbed at my chest. I felt so small, so powerless. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and fear. I was terrified that Margaret would discover my plan. I was terrified that it would fail. I was terrified that I would have to endure another round of her scolding and her insults. But I refused to back down. I had made a decision. I would not be hurt anymore. I would stand up and fight. And so, I put my plan into action. It was an action calculated to humiliate the family, to expose them without ever raising my voice or getting into an argument. I sent an email to every single person on that list I had so carefully compiled. But that email was not a notification about a trip. It was a confession. It was a testimony to the truth I had endured for all those years. I told them everything, in honest and painstaking detail. I wrote about Margaret's constant verbal abuse, about Michael's suffocating silence. I told them how she would badmouth me to him, how she forced all the housework onto me while she did nothing. As proof, I attached the evidence. I attached audio recordings, videos, and photographs. It was all undeniable. I didn't argue, I didn't accuse, I didn't name-call. I just sent the email and let the truth speak for itself. I knew that after they received that email, my relatives would be in for a terrible shock. They wouldn't be able to believe it. How could a good daughter-in-law, someone as gentle and sincere as me, do such a thing? They wouldn't be able to believe that a kind mother-in-law and a caring husband could do something so cruel. Oh, but it was the truth, and I was no longer afraid of it. 3 days later, it was all done. Those 3 days felt like 300 years. Every morning, I would wake up with a heavy heart and a vague, persistent sense of dread. I was so afraid that my plan would be discovered. I was afraid Margaret would ask about the tickets, ask what I had been doing. But she never did. She was too busy on the phone, consumed with bragging about her upcoming birthday trip. She was too confident, too proud, to ever suspect that a quiet daughter-in-law like me could be capable of, like anything but obedience. I spent those 3 days in a daze. I kept up with all the housework, I went to my part-time job, and I listened silently as she gossiped about other people. But inside my head, I was building another world. It was a world of revenge, a world of justice. I no longer saw myself as a victim. I was a woman who had fought, who had stood up for herself and who had won. Then, one day, I made my move. I couldn't wait any longer. I printed out the tickets, one by one. The plane tickets, the hotel vouchers, the tour confirmations, it all became a thick stack of paper. The whirring sound of the printer in my small room sounded like the beat of a war drum. Every page that came out was another step closer to freedom, to liberation. With my heart pounding in my chest, I carried the stack of papers into the living room. Margaret was watching television. She glanced over at me and said, "Are you done? I'd been waiting." Her voice was a mixture of impatience and pride. I nodded slowly. "Yes, Mother," I said. "The tickets are ready." Her face lit up with a look of surprise and delight as she took the thick sheaf of papers from my hands. She let out a loud, satisfied laugh. She flipped through the pages one by one, looking at the names and the confirmation numbers, feeling a great sense of victory. She had no idea. She didn't know that these weren't real tickets. They were fake confirmations, temporary reservations that had never been paid for. Margaret immediately got on the phone and started bragging to all the relatives. My daughter-in-law is so capable. She booked everything for us. I don't have to worry about a thing. All I have to do is pack my suitcase and go. Her voice was brimming with pride and satisfaction. I just stood there with my head bowed. I didn't say a word. I let her talk, let her boast, let her believe she was the winner. But I knew the truth. Her victory was just an illusion, and that illusion was about to disappear. I said only one thing, just one meaningful sentence. Don't worry, Mother. I'm sure everyone will remember this birthday trip for a very long time. Margaret looked at me, her expression surprised. Her eyes were filled with suspicion for a brief moment. But she didn't say anything. She was too lost in her own happiness to have room for any other thoughts. She was too busy basking in the praise from our relatives to notice me standing there quietly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had booked a real ticket, but it was a one-way ticket from New York to Miami. There was no return flight, and it wasn't a real, paid-for plane ticket. It was just a temporary reservation confirmation, held without payment. That night, I went back to my room and lay down, feeling the wild thumping of my heart. I had done it. I had done something I never thought I could do. I had endured so much, I had felt so much shame, but I had done it. And I knew this was only the beginning. My fight was far from over. But I am not afraid anymore. I am no longer the weak, submissive wife who puts up with everything. I am a woman who has fought, who has stood up for herself, and who has won. The next morning, I woke up early. I cleaned the house, made breakfast, and got ready for the new day, just as I always did. But I was no longer the daughter-in-law who could be ordered around and used. I was a woman who was deciding her own life, and I had made my decision. I would never go back. Never again would I return to that place of weakness, to the silent endurance, to all that suffering. I was going to live. I was going to live a life that was finally my own. It would be a life full of strength, a life full of pride. And I would never forget what had happened. I would never forget the tears I'd cried or the pain I had endured for so long. After that long, silent period of preparation, the fateful day had finally arrived. I went about my morning just like any other day. I was the first one up in the house, and I made a proper breakfast for everyone. But inside, a strange sensation was growing. It wasn't fear. It was a strange and profound sense of calm. I no longer felt like a victim. I was simply a woman waiting for the moment of truth, waiting for the moment of my release. That morning, the whole house was buzzing with the energy of a holiday. My mother-in-law, Margaret, had a look of pure pride and satisfaction on her face. She was wearing a loud, floral print outfit and had carefully, almost professionally, applied her makeup. She had her phone out, snapping one picture after another inside the house, in the car, and all along the way to the airport. She was sending them to the relatives and friends who couldn't come along, showing off the grand, luxurious trip that was about to begin. The children in the family were shouting with excitement, all of them dressed in brightly colored vacation clothes, pulling their little wheeled suitcases behind them. They were all completely lost in a world of fun and happy anticipation. I just stood there, observing it all, feeling the strangely peaceful and steady rhythm of my own heart. I wasn't wearing a flashy floral outfit. I wasn't wearing any makeup. I wasn't taking any pictures. I was just dressed in simple, comfortable clothes, quietly watching everyone with my small suitcase in hand. I saw the look of deep relief on my husband's face. He no longer had to deal with his mother's angry shouting, and he didn't have to worry about the tickets or anything that was about to happen. He believed with his whole heart that I had taken care of everything. But he had no idea how I had taken care of it. When we arrived at the airport, the air was electric with energy and excitement. Our big family of 20 people was drawing a lot of attention from the other travelers. Margaret walked confidently to the front of the line and handed the sheaf of papers I'd given her to the check-in agent. The young woman at the counter took them with a friendly, professional smile and started to type on her keyboard, ready to process them. I took a step back and just watched. I wasn't looking at the agent. I wasn't looking at my mother-in-law. I was looking at the faces of the relatives, the ones who had badmouthed me and laughed at my expense for years. And looking at them gave me a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. Their smiles, their excited chatter, they were all living in a fantasy world. And I knew that their fantasy was about to shatter into a million pieces. And then, it happened. The smile vanished from the agent's face. She looked up at Margaret with a confused expression and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there are no paid tickets here under this name. This is just a temporary reservation confirmation, and you should have seen it." Everyone just froze. They all looked at each other. Their faces, which had been filled with so much excitement just a moment before, were now masks of confusion and utter dismay. The children's laughter died away instantly. The noisy, festive atmosphere that had surrounded our group turned into a terrible, heavy silence. Margaret shouted, her voice a mix of shock and pure fury. "What do you mean? My daughter-in-law booked them. She booked everything." And then, every single pair of eyes turned to me. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, but my face was calm. I wasn't scared. I wasn't flustered. I had nothing left to lose. In a quiet, even voice, I said, "Yes, I sent you the confirmations 3 days ago, Margaret. I don't have the money to pay for 20 airline tickets. You told me to book them, so that's exactly what I did." Margaret stared at me, her expression a storm of shock and rage. Her eyes were filled with a burning hatred and resentment. She couldn't believe that I, the obedient, quiet wife, would ever do something like this. She couldn't even process the fact that I was talking back to her. The relatives were also staring at me, their faces slack with astonishment. They couldn't believe that I, the gentle, good daughter-in-law, would ever say such a thing. They couldn't believe that the wife they had always looked down on and laughed at was capable of such an act. I just stood there, my heart hammering away inside my chest, but I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. I just watched as the simple, unvarnished truth did all the talking for me. And I knew that this truth was going to be the biggest shock of their lives. And just like that, the busy airport had become our own personal stage of shame. The faces that had been alight with excitement just moments before were now twisted with anger and embarrassment. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was trembling. It wasn't from rage, you see. It was from a deep, profound humiliation that had wrapped itself around her like a shroud. She couldn't believe what was happening. Everyone had heard it. Everyone was looking at her. The woman who had always been so proud of her wealth, so proud of her status, now stood there holding a stack of worthless, temporary reservation papers. The relatives started to whisper amongst themselves. "Does she really have that kind of money?" One low voice murmured, but it was a sound that carried through the stunned silence. "There's no way they could afford a trip this extravagant, right?" Another one added, "I don't know." Margaret said that Sarah booked all the tickets. Those words, to me, were like the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I just stood there, a small smile playing on my lips, feeling a great sense of freedom wash over me. Michael had been silent this whole time, but now he came to my side. He leaned in close, his face a mask of confusion and fury, and whispered in my ear, "What in the world are you doing? Why would you say something like that?" I just looked at him and said, "I told you, Michael. I told you we didn't have the money to pay for 20 tickets. You told me to just book them, and we'd figure it out later. So, I did what you said. I booked them, I just didn't pay for them. Where was that money supposed to come from?" Michael stared at me, his face filled with pure rage. His eyes, can you even imagine? They were burning with a hatred and resentment I had never seen before. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that his wife, his quiet, gentle, obedient wife, would ever do something like this, that I would ever dare to defy him. My heart was pounding, but I stood my ground. I had nothing left to lose. My life after our wedding wasn't what I had dreamed of. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a tragedy. It was a long, quiet story of enduring, of swallowing my words, of crying silently into my pillow at night. And now, finally, that story was over. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the weak daughter-in-law they all knew. I was a woman who had fought, who had stood up for herself, and who had won. I wasn't afraid. I had nothing left to lose. I had already lost love, I had lost respect, and I had lost trust. Now, I was standing alone in this battle. But I knew I wasn't truly alone. I had the truth. And the truth was my strongest weapon. You know, after that moment in the airport, a deathly silence fell over all of us. The entire extended family of 20 people trudged back to their cars and went home in complete and utter shame. Not a single word was spoken. The children's laughter was gone, and so was the loud, cheerful chatter of the adults. The only sounds were the rumble of suitcases rolling across the pavement and the heavy shuffle of feet. The feet of people drowning in humiliation. Margaret, who had always walked with her head held so high, so full of pride, was now hunched over, staring at the ground. She didn't boast anymore. She didn't speak at all. She just walked with a heavy, defeated gait, her face a storm cloud of anger and shame. I looked at her, and I felt a deep sense of pity. She had once been such a powerful woman, respected by everyone. But now, she was just a person forced to live in disgrace. When we got back to the house, everyone scattered. No one looked at me, and no one spoke to me. They went straight to their rooms and shut their doors. The house, which had once been as lively as a festival, was now a desolate place, filled with a terrifying, heavy silence. I stood there, my heart beating a frantic rhythm in my chest. I didn't feel like a winner. I just felt a great, hollow emptiness. There was nothing left to do, nothing left to say. I was all alone in that big house, with nothing but my sadness and my pain for company. The next day, I woke up early. I cleaned the house, made breakfast, and got ready for the new day, just like I always did. But no one came out to eat. No one spoke to me. Margaret stayed in her room, and so did Michael. The entire house felt like a tomb, a place where nothing was alive. The story of what happened at the airport spread like wildfire. The neighbors knew, and all the relatives knew. From that day on, Margaret couldn't bring herself to leave the house. She was living in a prison of her own shame and humiliation. She couldn't hold her head up. She couldn't face anyone. I saw her once when I came home from work. She was standing on the back porch, just staring out at the street. And you know, her face was filled with so much worry and fear. She was no longer the powerful matriarch, the woman everyone looked up to. She was just a woman, alone, living with her disgrace. And I knew exactly what she was enduring. She had to bear the whispers, the gossip, and the ridicule from other people. She had to swallow her pride and accept her shame. And I knew that was a terrible kind of suffering. When Michael came home from work, he went straight to our room and started yelling at me. "What have you done?" he shouted, his voice thick with anger and hatred. "Why would you do this? Are you trying to destroy this family?" I just stood there in silence. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, feeling the steady, strong beat of my own heart. There was nothing left for me to say. I had said it all at the airport. I had said it all in the long years of my silence. And now, all I had left was the silence itself. He went on, his face contorted with fury. "What is it you want? Do you want to destroy my mother? My whole family?" I looked at him, and with a voice full of meaning, I said just one thing. "I told you, Michael. I told you we didn't have the money to pay for 20 airline tickets. You said, just book them, and we'll pay for it later. I did exactly what you told me to do. I booked them. But I didn't pay, because we don't have that kind of money." My husband's face was a twisted mask of fury as he stared at me. His eyes, and I'm sure you all know the look, were filled with a burning hatred and resentment. He simply could not believe it. That I, his gentle, obedient wife, could have done such a thing. That I would dare to fight back. And for the very first time, my husband's entire family was silent too. No one gave me an order. No one scolded me. No one handed me a list of chores to do. They didn't see me as their servant anymore. They didn't think of me as the weak daughter-in-law who would just endure. Everything without a word. They looked at me with a mixture of worry and fear on their faces. They had finally realized that I was not the fragile woman they had always believed me to be. I was living in a terrifying silence. The house, to me, felt like a lifeless wasteland. But that silence, do you know what it was for me? It was liberation. And it was freedom. I no longer had to wake up at the crack of dawn to cook a big breakfast for a family that wouldn't even acknowledge my effort. I no longer had to scrub the floors to please a mother-in-law who could never be satisfied. I no longer had to work myself to the bone to help pay for a husband who would never share anything with me. I finally had time for myself. I had time to think. I had time to do the things I wanted to do. I had time to read a book, to listen to music, to just go for a walk outside and feel the sun on my face. I was living. I was living a life that was truly my own. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I am a woman who fought, a woman who stood up for herself and won. And I know this is just the beginning. My battle is a long one. But I will not back down. I will stand my ground, and I will fight. You know, after those first few days of that awful silence, I had a lot of time to think. And some of you might be thinking that I did it all for revenge. But that's not true. This wasn't about revenge. I just wanted to protect myself. Life, for me, has been like a very long road. I walked down that road, and I stumbled, and I got hurt. But I realized that I couldn't just keep stumbling and getting hurt forever. I had to get up. I had to protect myself. I never wanted to humiliate my mother-in-law. I never wanted anyone in this family to feel the kind of pain that I had to go through for so long. But there was one thing she forgot. Even a daughter-in-law has her limits. And when she pushed me to that limit, I chose to fight back with silence. And that silence, you see, it wasn't weakness. It was strength. That silence was my voice. It was the voice of my hatred, the voice of my pain, and also the voice of my hope. I continued to live as a wife. I went to my job. I took care of the house. But from that day on, no one ever looked at me like I was their unpaid servant again. I still made breakfast, but only for myself. I still cleaned, but only what I felt needed to be done. I still worked, but I no longer had to sigh as my earnings went to pay for their luxurious vacations. I was living. I was living a life of my own, a life filled with strength and pride. Now, I'm sure there are some of you listening who will want to criticize me. You might say I was disrespectful, or you might say something about modern wives these days. But this is what I think. My mother-in-law was not a very kind person. So does she really have the right to blame me? I never asked for anything. I just wanted to be respected as a human being, as someone with feelings and thoughts and dreams of my own. Even a daughter-in-law deserves to be loved, to be heard, and to be respected. During those days of silence, I had time to look back on my life. I saw the woman I used to be, a woman who had loved, who had trusted, who had been filled with hope for the future. But I also saw the woman who had been treated unfairly, who had been used and ordered around day after day. And then I saw the woman who stood up, who fought back, and who found her own freedom. I didn't have any regrets. I didn't think I was a bad person. I hadn't done anything wrong. I just did what my heart told me to do. And I know that I will never regret what I did. My life after marriage was nothing like what I had imagined. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a tragedy. It was a story of patience and endurance, and of quiet tears shed into my pillow in the middle of the night. And now, that story is over. My story ends here. Thank you all for listening to the very end. I will see you again in the next story.